Looking through the viewfinder and crossing the threshold of the unknown, we uncover stories hidden in plain sight. Experience the profound moments of discovery that altered the course of human history.
That's why I'm walking through here and all of this. That is exactly what we were told to look for today. The suit, the bag, all of it. You fit it. That is why you were standing here and nobody else is.
I need you to tell me what somebody like you means. Say it clearly. This camera's recording everything you say.
It means what it means. Right now, you are just a black man with a bag in my lane, and
Officer Dale Hutchins, a 15-year TSSA veteran at O'Hare International Airport, had a habit of making certain passengers feel like criminals before they ever reached their gate. And on the morning of March 4th, he picked the wrong man in a tailored suit, slapped an orange tag on his briefcase, and told him to step aside. It wasn't the first time Hutchins had done this. It wasn't even the 100th. Over 15 years of working the security lanes at one of the busiest airports in the United States, he had developed a system, not written in any manual, not sanctioned by any supervisor, but practiced so consistently it had become invisible, even to him. He looked at certain passengers and saw threat. He looked at others and saw nothing at all. The badge on his chest gave his instincts the language of procedure, and the word routine had become his most reliable shield. But on this particular Tuesday morning, standing at Security Lane 4 in Terminal 1 of O'Hare International Airport, 10,000 West O'Hare Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, Officer Gary Flugg, Hutchins' lane partner and the man who would bring the dogs, was already watching the same cue, already reaching the same conclusions, and neither of them, not for a single second, considered who the man in the suit actually was, what they didn't know, what they could not have imagined as they snapped on their gloves and called for backup. Was that the quietly composed black man standing in front of them with a leather briefcase and a first-class boarding pass was the newly appointed Assistant District Attorney of Cook County, that his name was already known in every federal courthouse in the state of Illinois, and that before the week was over, the two of them would be out of a job, the airport would be writing a check that would make headlines, and their names would be attached to a civil rights case that attorneys across the country would be studying for years. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments right now. We love seeing where our JPTV family is tuning in from all over the world. And if you believe that a badge should never be used as a weapon, that no man should be dragged out of a public line and broken down simply because of the color of his skin, then hit that like button and subscribe to Prevailing Justice. Because we don't just tell these stories, we make sure they are never forgotten. Everett Malone was 44 years old, and he had spent the better part of 2 decades building a legal career that most people only read about in case studies. He had grown up in the South Shore neighborhood on Chicago's southeast side, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at Rush University Medical Center and still made it home in time to check his homework. He had gone to DePaul University on a partial scholarship, graduated top of his class, then pushed through 4 of the most grueling years of his life at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, where his professors remembered him not for being loud but for being precise. Everett Malone did not argue with emotion. He argued with architecture, building cases so cleanly, so airtight, that opposing counsel often found themselves agreeing with him before they realized what had happened. He had spent 12 years as a senior prosecutor in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, tried over 60 felony cases, and had just 3 weeks prior been formally appointed as Assistant District Attorney, a position that put him in the same rooms as federal judges, city officials, and law enforcement leadership across the state. He was, by every professional and legal measure, a man of extraordinary standing. On the morning of March 4th, he was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the 9:45 a.m. flight to Midway, about the briefing documents he had reviewed twice the night before, and about whether he had remembered to pack the charger for his iPad. He wore a charcoal gray 3-piece suit, the one his colleague Renata had told him made him look like a closing argument, and carried a single slim leather briefcase containing his laptop, his iPad, a legal notepad, 2 folders of case documents, and a protein bar he had grabbed on the way out of his apartment on South Michigan Avenue. He arrived at O'Hare just before 8 a.m., moved through check-in at the American Airlines counter on the departures level without incident, and joined the security line at Terminal 1 with 40 minutes to spare before boarding. The line moved steadily. The family in front of him, a white couple with 2 children and an overloaded stroller, passed through without so much as a second glance from the officers. The businessman ahead of them, laptop bag open, loafers already in the tray before he reached the conveyor, walked through the body scanner and was waved forward in seconds. Everett placed his briefcase on the belt, removed his shoes, set his phone in the tray, and stepped forward. That was when he heard it. "Random selection, sir. Step to the side." The voice belonged to Officer Gary Flug, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with the flat, practiced authority of a man who had learned to say things in a way that did not invite questions. He was already moving toward Everett before the words finished leaving his mouth, an orange tag in his hand, snapping it onto the handle of the leather briefcase with the ease of someone who had done it too many times to count. Flug was 38 years old, had been working TSA at O'Hare for 9 years, and had in that time accumulated 3 internal complaints, none of which had resulted in formal discipline. 2 of those complaints had been filed by black male passengers. The third had been filed by a Somali family traveling together for a funeral. In each case, the word used in the incident report was the same: routine. Everett stepped to the side. He watched Flug open the briefcase and begin working through it with both hands, lifting the laptop out and setting it on the table with less care than the situation warranted, flipping through the legal folders, unzipping the interior pocket, running his fingers along the seam lining. Around them, the line continued to move. A woman in a red cardigan passed through, a teenage boy with headphones, an older man with a rolling suitcase who gave Everett a brief sideways look before looking away. Nobody else was stopped. Nobody else had an orange tag on their bag. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Everett asked. His voice was calm, not confrontational, measured. The voice of a man who understood exactly what was happening and had decided, at least for now, to let the process play out. Flug didn't look up. "Just routine, sir. You've been through every section of that bag. Standard procedure." Still not looking up. Everett said nothing more. He stood with his hands at his sides, shoes off, watching a stranger rifle through folders that contained sealed case documents, watching his iPad get turned over like something suspicious, watching the entirety of his professional life get treated like probable cause. The people in line behind him moved around him in a wide arc, the way people do when they don't want to be associated with whatever is happening nearby. A child stared. A woman pretended to look at her phone. And Officer Gary Flug continued searching a briefcase that contained nothing but the tools of a distinguished legal career, never once explaining why this man in this line on this morning had been the one chosen. What Flug didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that somewhere in the back offices of Terminal 1, a separate conversation was already underway. An anonymous tip had just come in, and things were about to get much, much worse. While Everett stood at the security lane with his belongings spread across a steel table, the back office of Terminal 1 was already moving. About 20 minutes earlier, a call had come into the TSA operations desk at O'Hare. An anonymous tip. The caller said a passenger was traveling through the airport that morning with a briefcase packed with drugs, and that the person intended to smuggle the package onto a domestic flight. The tip was thin. No full name, no flight number, no gate. The only description given was that the suspect was a male passenger carrying a briefcase. That was it. That was the whole thing. No height, no age, no other identifying detail that would allow a reasonable officer to narrow down a specific individual in one of the busiest airports in the country. But the tip had been logged, flagged, and passed along to the officers working the floor. And somehow, without checking whether the man matched any real description, without confirming a single detail from the anonymous call, Officer Gary Flug had already decided that Everett Malone was his guy. A few minutes after P. Flug finished tearing through the briefcase and found nothing. No drugs, no contraband, not even anything remotely unusual for a professional traveler. He stepped away briefly and made a radio call. He did not release Everett. He did not apologize for the delay or return the items he had scattered across the table. He just stepped back, spoke quietly into his radio, and waited. Everett began carefully repacking his briefcase on his own, stacking his folders back in order, sliding his laptop into its sleeve. He was still calm, still composed, but the muscle in his jaw was working, and anyone paying close attention would have seen it. That was when Officer Steve Colbeck arrived. Colbeck came from the far end of the concourse, walking with two airport security dogs and their handlers just slightly behind him. He was a TSA enforcement officer, which meant his job was specifically for situations that had moved beyond routine screening. His presence in a security lane was not casual. It was a statement, and every passenger in the surrounding area felt it immediately. People slowed down, some stopped walking altogether. A small crowd began to gather at a careful distance, the way crowds always do when they sense something serious is about to happen in a public space. Colbeck walked directly to where Everett was standing and told him plainly that he had been identified as a suspect in connection with a drug smuggling tip received that morning. He said it loud enough that the people nearest to them could hear every word. Everett stopped repacking his briefcase. He straightened up and looked at Colbeck directly. He asked in a steady voice what description they had received, because he would like to know how they had arrived at him specifically. Colbeck did not answer the question. Instead, he told Everett he needed to come with them, and before Everett could say another word, Colbeck grabbed him by the arm and pulled him physically out of the lane. It was not a gentle redirection, it was a drag. Everett's body twisted with the force of it, and his briefcase swung hard against the edge of the steel table as he was pulled away from it. People in the line watched openly now. A woman near the back of the queue took out her phone. Everett told Colbeck firmly that he was handling him roughly and that it was unnecessary, that he was not resisting, that he had asked a simple question and had not received an answer. Colbeck told him to calm down. Flug stepped back in and the two of them steered Everett toward a more open section of the concourse floor, away from the belt, where the dogs were already circling the leather briefcase with their handlers holding their leads taut. Then things got worse. What happened in the next 2 minutes was witnessed by dozens of people. Colbeck and Flug went through the briefcase a second time, but this time they did not take care with the contents. Documents came out and landed on the floor. The legal folders were opened and shaken. The iPad was pulled out and set down hard on the tile. The laptop was removed and placed to the side. Everett watched his work. Confidential legal documents, sealed case files, a career's worth of professional material. Get treated like garbage on a public airport floor, and he spoke up. He told them clearly, for the first time, that he was the newly appointed Assistant District Attorney of Cook County, that the documents in that briefcase were part of an active legal matter, and that they needed to stop what they were doing and explain their legal basis for detaining him. Neither officer stopped. Flug told him to be quiet. Colbeck told him they would sort it all out once they finished. Everett tried again. Louder this time, not shouting but firm. And when he reached down to prevent a folder of sealed documents from being kicked further across the floor, Colbeck grabbed his arm again with both hands and wrenched it back. Everett felt it immediately. A sharp, searing pain shot through his left forearm and up into his shoulder. He pulled back instinctively, and Colbeck tightened his grip before finally releasing him. Everett stepped back and held his arm against his chest. He did not cry out. He stood there in the middle of a public terminal, briefcase emptied at his feet, arm fractured, surrounded by officers who had found absolutely nothing, while strangers filmed from 20 feet away. The dogs had found nothing either. No drugs, no contraband, nothing but documents and devices belonging to a man who had told them exactly who he was and had not been believed. The search was over, but not one person in a uniform said a word. The terminal had gone quiet in the way that large public spaces go quiet when something has crossed a line that everyone present can feel, but nobody wants to name out loud. The security lane behind them had slowed almost to a stop. Passengers who had been in a hurry 60 seconds ago were now standing still, phones out, watching. A gate agent from the American Airlines desk nearby had stepped out from behind her counter and was looking over with the careful, uncertain expression of someone trying to decide whether to call someone. The two officers stood over an emptied briefcase and a scattered pile of documents and said nothing. The dogs had been walked back. The search had produced nothing, and Everett Malone stood a few feet away from them, holding his left arm against his body, his face composed in the way that only a man with enormous self-control can manage when he is in serious pain and serious anger at the same time. That was when Gerald Stoop came through the door. Stoop was the head of security for Terminal 1 at O'Hare International Airport. He was a 22-year veteran of airport operations, a man who had managed incidents ranging from medical emergencies to full terminal evacuations, and he did not walk fast unless something was already bad. He was walking fast now. One of the gate agents had radioed up to his office about the gathering crowd and the dogs and the man holding his arm, and Stoop had come down himself because something about the description had made him uneasy. He pushed through the edge of the crowd, took in the scene, documents on the floor, a briefcase turned inside out, two of his officers standing over a well-dressed black man with an injury, and he opened his mouth to begin the standard intervention. Then he saw Everett's face. Stoop knew that face. He had seen it 3 weeks earlier on the cover of the Chicago Tribune, above a headline about the new appointment to the Cook County District Attorney's Office. He had seen it again in an internal memo distributed to senior airport staff about coordinating security protocols with the DA's office for an upcoming federal case. He stood completely still for a moment that felt, to everyone watching, much longer than it actually was. Then he looked at the documents on the floor. He looked at the scattered folders. He looked at Everett's arm, and then he looked at Flug and Colbeck with an expression that was not anger, yet it was something colder than anger. The look of a man calculating the full weight of what has just happened on his floor, in his terminal, in front of witnesses and cameras. He walked to Everett first. He said his name, Mr. Malone. And in those two words, the entire atmosphere of the situation shifted like a door swinging open in a pressurized room. Flug's head turned. Colbeck went still. Stoop asked Everett quietly if he was hurt, and Everett told him his arm needed to be looked at. Stoop nodded, turned to a nearby staff member, and gave a quiet instruction. Then he turned around and faced his officers. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He told them in plain and level language exactly who was standing in front of them. The newly appointed Assistant District Attorney of Cook County, a man whose appointment had been covered in 3 major newspapers, a man who was on his way to a scheduled legal meeting, a man who, at no point, had matched the description from the anonymous tip they had received, a man who had identified himself to them and had not been listened to, a man who was now standing in a public terminal with a fractured arm, his confidential legal documents spread across the floor, while over 100 people watched and recorded. Fleeg went pale. The shift was visible and immediate. The posture that had carried so much authority 20 minutes ago collapsed into something smaller. He started talking, the words coming out uneven and stumbling, reaching for the language of procedure, of protocol, of we were just following the tip, but the words had nowhere to land. Stope was not listening to the explanation. He was looking at the floor. Colbeck said nothing at all. He just stared at Everett with the expression of a man who has just understood, too late, exactly what he has done. Everett did not look at either of them. He picked up one of his folders from the floor himself, slowly with his good arm, and held it against his chest alongside the other one. He did not accept the apology that Flug began offering. He did not respond to Stoop's second attempt to express regret on behalf of the airport. He simply stood in the middle of that terminal, in a suit that was now disheveled, holding his fractured arm, and said nothing. His silence was the loudest thing in the building. 3 flights had already been delayed. Everett Malone did not go to his meeting in Chicago that day. He was taken by airport medical staff to Northwestern Memorial Hospital on East Erie Street, where imaging confirmed what he already knew. A clean fracture of the left radius, the kind that comes from a wrist being twisted and wrenched against its natural direction with force. He was fitted with a cast, given documentation of the injury, and discharged the same afternoon. He sat in that hospital with his jacket folded across his lap and his phone in his good hand, and he made 2 calls. The first was to his office to reschedule the meeting. The second was to his personal attorney. He did not post about it. He did not speak to the press that day or the day after. He went home to his apartment on South Michigan Avenue, set his damaged briefcase by the door, and let the process begin quietly, the way he had always done things. with patience, with precision, and with complete confidence in what was coming. 7 days later, the lawsuit landed. The filing named Officer Gary Flug, Officer Steve Kolbeck, the Transportation Security Administration, and the management body of O'Hare International Airport as defendants. The charges were not minor. The suit cited racial profiling, unlawful detention, excessive use of force, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, and deliberate indifference to a known pattern of discriminatory conduct. That last part was significant because Everett's legal team had done their homework in those 7 days. They had pulled the internal complaint history on both officers. They had obtained the anonymous tip log and confirmed in writing that the description provided by the caller did not match Everett Malone in any specific detail. They had gathered witness statements from 14 passengers who had been present in the terminal that morning, and they had obtained footage from 3 separate airport cameras and 4 passenger phones. That documented every second of what had happened from the moment the orange tag went on the briefcase to the moment Gerald Stoop walked through the crowd and said Everett's name. The case never made it to trial. The airport's legal team reviewed the evidence and within 6 weeks requested a settlement conference. The number that changed hands was not disclosed publicly, but sources close to the proceedings confirmed it was a figure significant enough that the airport's insurers flagged it as one of the largest civil rights settlements in the institution's recent history. The money was not the point, but it was a statement in the kind written in dollars because some institutions do not understand any other language. Flug and Kolbeck were terminated within 10 days of the lawsuit being filed. Their dismissals were described in the official airport statement as the result of a thorough internal review, which was a careful way of saying that when the full record of their conduct was laid out in one document, there was no version of events in which they could remain employed. The internal complaints that had been filed against Flug in previous years, ignored, filed away, resolved with nothing, were now part of a formal record that would follow both men forward. Gerald Stoop, to his credit, had cooperated fully with the investigation from the beginning and had submitted his own account of what he witnessed without being asked twice. The airport announced a mandatory retraining program for all TSA screening personnel. New protocols were introduced requiring documented justification for any secondary selection that could not be tied to a specific objective trigger. A civilian oversight panel was brought in to review the complaint history of every officer on active duty. None of it brought back the morning that had been taken from Everett. None of it unset the bone in his arm, or put his documents back in order, or removed the memory of standing on a public floor while strangers stared. But it changed something real, and Everett Malone knew the difference between justice and revenge well enough to recognize which one he had actually won. He returned to work the following Monday with his cast, his briefcase, and a new case on his desk. He never mentioned the incident publicly. He didn't have to. The record spoke clearly enough on its own. If you have ever been judged before you were heard, if you have ever had to stand in a room full of people who underestimated exactly who you were, drop a briefcase in the comments right now. Prevailing justice sees you, and we tell these stories so the world sees you too. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and if you are not subscribed to JPTV yet, right now is the time.
Archives do significantly more than just preserve the past. They softly whisper the intricate stories of our world. Each story is a necessary fragment of a larger truth. Thank you for choosing to seek that truth alongside our dedicated team.